by individuals and expertise that we've had the opportunity to listen to and interact with, the conversations that took place amongst colleagues in the P-12 world and post-secondary yesterday were just incredible. And we are very grateful for all of you who participated and ultimately grateful for those who have coordinated this work and all this efforts. I get the extreme pleasure and honor of introducing or reintroducing you to President Dr. Aaron Thompson to finish us out today and deliver his message as we move forward, what we do with this information, how we move forward with something new and to best serve our students. If you didn't have an opportunity to hear about Dr. Thompson, I want to share a little bit about him. As a first-generation college student from rural Clay County, Kentucky, Dr. Aaron Thompson experienced firsthand the transformative power of a college credential. And if you haven't heard him speak and experience his passionate talks and motivation, you will today, and you'll understand why. As president of the Kentucky Council on Postsecondary Education, he works daily to ensure all Kentuckians have an equal opportunity to improve their lives through postsecondary education. Before taking the helm of CPE, Dr. Thompson served as interim president of the Kentucky State University, the CPE executive vice president and provost, and faculty member and administrator at Eastern Kentucky University. He has extensive leadership experience with this private and nonprofit sectors that is highly sought after national speaker. Dr. Thompson has authored or co-authored numerous books and peer-reviewed publication on diversity, cultural competence, first-year experience programs, retention, and student success, among many other topics. I think you will be more than motivated and excited to hear what Dr. Aaron Thompson has to share, and I will turn it over to him now. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda, and good morning, everybody. What a great day, right? What a great day. We're going to end on a powerful set of slides here in a second, but I just want to take a few minutes just to say thank you. Thank you for sticking through this, but moreover, thank you for doing what you do. I mean, what you do, you have to understand is more powerful than even you can understand, you know, and that comes through in many ways, but the area that obviously comes through the most is when we're able to get these young people that may not have ever thought that they could even get in college, get them prepared for college, get them in, and get them through. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. I have the coolest job in the world, I have to tell you. I mean, without a doubt, I think that I am so blessed to lead the state that I love so well and lead the area that, in fact, I think I was built to lead, and that's higher education. Knowing the transformative power of higher education is far beyond anything that we can truly measure. But what we know is that it can be given to us in such a manner that we can continue to measure it with generations to come. So I want to thank you for being a part of this. Let me start by thanking a few people, by the way, for making this happen. Then we'll get into this. Then at the end, we'll let the slides go, and then I got a few other things to tell you that I hope you will take to heart and take to action, really. And so, but before that, let me thank some people I do need to thank. This just couldn't happen without them. You know, the Melissa Bells, the Stephanie Mayberry, Missy Ross, Kim Drummond, Amanda Ellis, who just introduced me, Heather Fazy, Wayne Fielder, who's really, him and Heather kind of make this technology work for us. I still don't know how it works, really, by the way, but they do it. I also want to thank people like Gabrielle Gayhart, who's really that person who's out there really doing the social media at the levels we need to have it done. Melissa Young, who writes a lot of my stuff. Bruce Brooks, who really just kind of makes everything happen. He's going to be running the slides today, but if you only knew the level that Bruce interacts with me, just to kind of make sure that I don't screw up a lot, you would appreciate him even more. Yesterday I had a chance to move in and out a couple of the groups, and I have to tell you, I was especially impressed by, all of our facilitators, Carrie Hodge, Jessica Romeus, Mary Jackson, Natalie Fagan, Beth Lawson, Jennifer Fraker, all of these people. And many of these folks have doctors in front of their names, but moreover, they have the kind of attitude, the belief system, and the abilities to actually do the many things other than just the facilitation, the many things in their jobs every day that helps us to do what we need to do. There's many more I haven't think because, right now they don't come to mind. But just to let you know, they are in my mind all the time. So for those that I failed to thank, I apologize up front. I want to thank our speakers. We had a chance to start off with Matt Gandol, to listen to Bridget Ramsey Pritchard and the student voices talk about where they were coming from, where we need to go. We had a chance yesterday to have many of our breakout sessions that really focused at a microscopic level on where we need to go. This morning, I had a chance to listen to your speaker a little bit. Of course, you speak in my language. These are the things that I research and write about. All of these items coming together, we hope, has provided you with some sense that we are serious about the work we're doing. And we know you are. This Path Forward conference has even shown that with record-breaking numbers. And this tells me, it's not just coming out of COVID, but this tells me that in fact, we are dedicated to learning more about what we need to do the things that serve others. And so once again, I appreciate that. And before we get to the slides, I just want to put it in perspective, at least where I'm coming from, because these things that we're doing comes from not a place necessarily where we've been trained or educated to do it, but comes from a place that's deeper. It comes from this core value system that we have. It comes from this place that helps us to know that if we can apply those things that we are in an emotionally intelligent way, then our students can learn culturally, they can learn emotionally, they can learn socially, and they can learn academically. That they may not be able to see themselves exactly learning in the equal way that others, and we've got to move away from that if we're ever going to get higher education where it needs to be. It is about, no doubt, this idea that we have to be more equitable in what we're providing. And today I want to charge you with some items around equity and quality, but it is about understanding the diversity of the populations that we serve, and how we need to include them in their own learning paradigm, and how we need to make sure that we give them the inputs that they need to learn from their base, from their foundation. And that's equity. And that's exactly what it's all about. Yes, you've heard about my background, but I talk about it just to let you know the power, the transformative power of higher education. My father was illiterate. My mother had an 8th grade education. I'm a first generation high school student. And I didn't get to this place without that kind of assistance that you are here to provide. I didn't get to this place without people who are actually looking at me and thinking I had the ability to do it. I didn't get to this place without having that input, not just believing I could do it, but be willing to put me on their backs and carry me to a place of doing it. This is what we are about. These are the things that matter. This is why I'm here, and this is why I feel blessed. And so as I end this conference today, just let you know that we're not talking about ending the process. We're not talking about ending what we stand for. We're not talking about ending the level of commitment that we have to increase ourselves way beyond any place that we thought we could go, as mentors, as collaborators, as people who are dedicated to providing this. So Bruce, I'm gonna let you start the slide and let's go through this and I'll come back and end it up. What do we know now, right? There's a lot we don't know. As I said in the opening speech, I have more questions than answers, but I do have some way to strategically point to where we need to go. We do have data. We do have information. We do have voices like from students and other people telling us. We do have faculty and staff on our campuses that experience their own issues, but yet knew that they had to perform to make sure their students could perform. So we learned some things. We learned that we really had an unreliable internet access system for many of us. We learned that, social isolation, and listen, I've been in my home now for over a year, right? That in fact, that has a big impact on the way that a person sees him or herself and the way they may even see others, on the mental health of a person. We've seen unemployment, and the data told us that that if you had a higher education credential, you probably were not unemployed. But we have seen unemployment. We even seen that it affected certain groups more than others: low income, people of color, women, right? Mm-hmm. That we've seen all of these. We've seen that people experience financial difficulties because of this. Unemployment, people are trying to get themselves back engaged in the workforce, and they need money to do so. We've seen food and housing insecurities. We knew all this was there before, but this exacerbated it. We've seen caregiving as an issue. Parents, we have people on our staff, kids were not in school. They had to take care of the kids and take care of the work, and didn't have reliable enough internet services to do both. We've seen that they, in many cases, took care of people that were sick by COVID, elderly parents and others. We've seen illness really to a large degree. We've seen deaths, all of these things, but the social injustice that we saw pop up and what happened last year at Black Lives Matter, you have to understand that's something we saw, but it was in place. And we know that higher education is truly the key to really combat even items like social injustice. That's why equity is so important. We've seen anxiety and depression. These are all the things that we know we've seen, but we've seen a few other things I'm going to talk about in a minute that really gives us hope that we can do what we do even a lot better than we ever thought about doing. Next slide, please. So what did we do? Well, we did a few things well. We pivoted fairly fast on the hybrid learning, right? When we found out that we were going to have to move in our higher education way, I met with the presidents immediately, and we met every week, and we were actually moving different items to make sure that our students could learn in the process. So we never closed. That's what I tell people. Higher education, we never closed. Now, we may perform differently than we did traditionally, but we never closed. So we realized we could pivot fairly fast. Our faculty, our staff, students pivoted fairly fast. Now, I'm not going to argue that learning was exactly the same. We know better. But it also told us what we needed to do to engage our students in that learning paradigm differently than we had before. Mental health. We knew we had this to a point where we didn't even know how to fully measure it, but it was brought to bear, heavily brought to bear. Now, I will tell you that CPE and the campuses, we worked hard, and in a few minutes, I'll show you some of the dollars we put into this process to try to do it in a way that it would reach everybody to get the help that they need. And not all mental health is the same, by the way, right? Not everybody experiences in exactly the same way. So at what level did we need to interact with that student or that faculty or that staff member to help them get what they need to get? How, I think of our Garrett folk, what they were doing, what they've done with our seniors that were graduating without that traditional graduation sort of ceremony, and how we helped them to focus on where they needed to go. Racial inequality was a huge issue that popped up in our criminal justice system, in our educational system, political system. It was everywhere, right? It was hitting us from all different sides. Now, I would argue that as an African-American male who grew up in Kentucky and in other places, that I've experienced it, yes, at deep levels. But what I do know is that you didn't have to be an African-American male to experience what was happening. And the idea that we are now more focused on racial equity than we've ever been. So that was an outcome that we need not to forget about, that we need not to let down on. We need to grow this in such a way that everybody gets an opportunity to be a part of the system. Affordability, big issue, whether it was perceived, where students didn't know if they could go to college. As we found out on my listening tour that people said, Dr. Thompson, I just can't afford to go to college. We don't have enough money. And what they were telling me is that they didn't know how to get money. They didn't know what was available to them. They didn't even know what the prices were that they were going to have to pay. Because we were advertising what I call sticker price, which scares me. If you ever buy a car, you know what I mean. but there's a net price. They didn't understand that at least probably about 42% of what was on the sticker they were not going to pay. But they didn't even understand how to pay for the rest of it. They didn't even understand what college meant in many cases. Many people thought that college was a 4-year degree alone. They didn't realize that a credential at our community college system is college, whether it's technical or one that would transfer to a 4-year institution. So, but then there's real affordability. There's people not able to make it because they have no money. There's middle class people or lower working class people that couldn't make it because of money. So we had to focus on this. We had to focus on that paradigm of completion as we think about affordability, not just entering college. Admissions. Several years ago when I came in, we made our admissions policy test optional. The campuses could choose what they needed to do with that. But what they realized during the pandemic, that they could actually have a test optional item themselves and still get students to the end goal. That we didn't have to have developmental education with no credit hours to help students to learn with the kind of assistance that they needed to learn with. We learned a lot in this process. So how do we build on that? Bruce, next slide, please. So what have we done? Well, we got some federal stimulus monies and we've got other monies. I'm proud to say that higher education, we were funded this year for the first time in about 12 years, a little over 12 years, and I'm happy about that. You know, we were one of the very few groups to be funded. I appreciate the governor and the legislature for actually coming and understanding that higher education is a return on investment that's huge. It's not just a cost, it really has a huge benefit. For the state, about 62 times that of the dollar they put in, they get returned with a higher education credential. So I appreciate that. But we also know that we had to use the money coming in a very strategic way, federal dollars. And I'm going to argue that there's other federal dollars coming in that you all need to have an input in to say, how can we get the biggest input out of it, right? We distributed the emergency relief funds that the governor gave us, as well as the federal government gave us, in a way that helped us to do what we needed to do. We focused heavily on the mental health, both at the micro level on the campuses to help them to build their system, but also at the macro level where we were able to bring in a group. I appreciate Stephanie Mayberry and a lot of other folks that would help students to be able to get the kind of help they needed online, not just telehealth, but be able to go on the web and get the help they needed based on the conditions that they were showing. And they could do it fast and then get triaged to where they needed to go. That was powerful. We also put money into knowing that we did have learning loss coming into post-secondary. That's just the truth. We may not know to what degree, but we know it's true. So we are putting forth like $3 million to access to go into our post-secondary campuses to help with bridge programming that would help students to get not only academically skilled up, but socially, emotionally, and culturally. Next slide, please. So this hasn't taken us from our North Star. Our North Star still is what it is. And that is that we have to be at a 60% attainment goal of a student or a citizen of Kentucky, I should say, to have some educational credential that matters by 2030. Now that's important because we know that the most direct correlation between a powerful economy in this state is a powerful educated workforce. So higher education is the most direct correlation that we know to that powerful economy. And we need, in order to have a sustainable economy, we need to have 60% of our citizens with that post-secondary credential. And we're going to keep pushing on that hard. You're going to hear over and over again, to ad nauseum. I hope you can hear it in your sleep even. We're going to be pushing that. We're going to be talking about what we need to do and not just relying on what we've done, but I'm going to take a minute to celebrate. We've increased this 20 percentage points since 2008. Do you folk know how much that is? I know you do. That's powerful. Thank you. Because it's you all that's doing it. You know, our short-term certificate was a huge growth, but we got people in the workplace, in the jobs. Now we have to get them back through the adult learner process and skill them up. So this doesn't make us stop. It just gives us a new baseline to build our continuous improvement model on. Next slide, please. So to do this, there's 4 priorities that I want you all to remember. And as you build your plan for your individual shops, whether you're in higher education or if you're in P12 education, this applies to all of us. And this is the way we're going to be approaching this outcome that we need. We are building that P20 system that you've heard of, the education continuum that we're doing, because we understand that this has to be done together. We have to focus on the first of our priorities. These are not in rank order, by the way, but the first of our priorities is about this value proposition and helping everybody to know that higher education is valuable at many different levels. We know it's valuable economically. As my mama said, boy, if you get an education, then you'll learn how to count your money. But it's also valuable because it gives you options. As my daddy said, boy, you get an education, you won't have to break your back in the coal mines. But he was telling me it gives me options. So there's a value proposition there that's bigger than just money. It's a value proposition there because it goes to happiness. It goes to better mental health. It goes to better health overall. It goes in many cases to keep you out of prison if you look at the data. So we have to work on this value proposition that talks about how important higher education really is. And that leads to affordability. We've got to become that place where people perceive that they can go to college, they can afford to go to college, but we also have to provide them with a mechanism and even sometimes money and short emergency loans or in some way to help get them through. And I'm happy to say that our institutions have done exactly that. Many of them have promise programs now. Last dollar in, or when they need money to get through, they run into trouble, we'll get them through. So we have to look at affordability in that way, but we've got to keep our tuition down. I'm not shy about this. I'm happy to say in the last couple of years, been the lowest tuition in the history. We had a 0.7% increase last year, and we're going to keep going, folks. This is important to understand, but success, every student should know they have the opportunity for success, and every student should be able to have the inputs it takes to be successful. But a lot of people, we talk all the time, well, everybody knows they can go to college. Not everybody knows they can go to college, I promise you. But it's our job to help them to know. But once we get them, so this path forward is not just about getting people in, it's about getting people in and getting them through with deep learning. So it's not about the quality is there. So success is about quantity and quality. It is about gap closing. It is about equity. It is about not discounting people based on their age, their income, their gender, race, or their geography. It is about that. And we are focused heavily on that. And the pandemic has told us that we need to focus even more heavily on that. But it's about employability. Not many people enter college without wanting a job afterwards and one that pays to sustainability. But it's more than just whether or not we get them through and get them a job. It's whether or not they made the right choices early. And we heard about the career choices that we need to make. We heard about how we need to intervene even in high school, at least, and sometimes 7th, 8th grade, to help them get there. It's not just about us doing it in the senior year of college. Employability is about getting the right skills to be employed as far as the technical skills, but it's also about those employability essential skills. Some people call them soft. They're not soft to me. They're powerful and they're hard. They are talking about being able to communicate at a written and oral level, being able to problem solve, being able to work with people of different backgrounds to get where they need to go. Next slide, please. So we've done a lot of things around this. We started a communication plan, years ago about Kentucky Higher Education Matters. And this is about us giving that message out that goes to that first one. And I won't spend a lot on this, but you all have been very much a part of it. And we're going to hit you from all sides, not just Twitter and Facebook, but we're going to give you blogs. We're going to give you a chance to interact. We're going to give you webinars. We're going to give you all kinds of different things to help you to become a part of this communication campaign. And so it's not just we wait to get them in college or we wait to get them out of high school. It's about us helping them to be powerful enough while they're in high school, get them into college, and we still keep up with them. So my argument is that we're buying into that student, him or herself. Next slide, please. So we've got to be more affordable. And I've told you some of those things already we're doing with more of our need-based aid being given to our students, more of the emergency loans, keeping tuition down, and now having money from the legislature and the governor's office that allows us to make some of those things powerful and positive. Next slide, please. But we have to ensure that more students get the degree. I'm going to show you some slides here to let you know how well we've done, but I'm going to once again ask you to double down. We've got to do the things we need to do, and that is sometimes focusing on the mental health and the social health of a student as much as the academic health of a student. And you see some of the things we've done here. And launching this education continuum with the Lieutenant Governor and the Commissioner of Education is one of the more powerful things that I think we can do. And all of you have a chance to get involved in this. You know, don't take yourself out of it because somehow it looks exclusive. It's not exclusive. We are asking those of you with the power to offer, please do it. But it's implementing this DEI policy we have. You know, and it's a powerful policy that not just goes with the idea that we need to have education, you know, given to all people of diverse backgrounds, but that we need to make sure once we get them, we close their gaps, that we help them all to learn at the top level. It is also about measuring how well we're doing it, and that's cultural competence. And people have heard me give this example before, but I'll give it to you again, just so you can have a better operational definition. I mean, y'all saw my TikTok video, you know I can dance, right? You know, but it's that dance analogy goes to this. If you're having a dance, diversity is inviting lots of people to the dance, different ways of thinking, different ways of being, different ways of looking, different ways of acting, all kinds of different things that look at the diversity. You invite all those people to your dance. Inclusion is that you ask them all to dance. Equity is knowing that not everybody can dance as well as I can dance. Right? So that means that they're going to have extra input to help them to be able to perform at the level that you need for them to perform in. That's equity. That's what our DEI policy is going to. It goes to that equity paradigm, but it also goes one step farther to cultural competence, and that is to have assessment and measurement to let us know how well we're doing that, how well we're building the climate of the campus that leads to how well we can culturally have our campus in a way that people will want to come to us because they know they're going to feel accepted and not wait to get there to see if they are. That's powerful. Our performance funding model it has a strong equity component to it, and you know that. It goes to push these credentials at an equitable level. And these two things together, along with many other inputs and policies, but moreover, what you're doing is really working. Next slide, please. So here's some data I want to share with you. I don't know if you've seen this or not, but I couldn't help with a group like this to share. So if we look at enrollment's going down, you know that. We have a decline in high school enrollment, but moreover, we have only 50.5% of those students that are graduating from high school going to college. We can't deal with that, folks. We have a declining FAFSA rate because of COVID and other things. But this is an indicator of how well we are preparing students to know that they can do college. But we have to work on that. And I'm going to ask you to put that in your plan, in your charge we'll give you. But some celebration first. Even though we had a declining enrollment, you see a 6.7% increase decrease over the last 5 years. Here's the positive. We had a 12% increase in our underrepresented minority enrollment. That's good. That means you're focused. That means you folk in post-secondary and in secondary are focused and you're aligning the needs of these students. Next slide, please. If you look at credentials, I'm proud to say in Kentucky, we're closing gaps and we're closing it as fast or faster than almost every state in the union. And you see that in the last 5 years, we've had a 17.5% increase and our credentials earned. And that is even in the light of declining budgets. That's powerful. But look at our underrepresented minority populations. We're up 34%. We doubled that. We're closing gaps, people. And that's what it's about. And you notice we're not closing gaps by decreasing the total. We're closing gaps by increasing everybody. So the most you give for those that deserve it the most or need it the most will get you return on investment for all students. That's the way you have to look at it. This is not, it's not a zero-sum game. Everybody increases. If you have a mentor-mentee relationship, the mentor, in fact, gets more benefit out of that relationship than the mentee, but both are served. Next slide, please. If you look at our retention rate, this is powerful because retention is hard to move, and it's one of those things that goes up and down. You hope it has a trajectory where it goes up, but not all the time does it. In Kentucky, I'm proud to say we are. Look at this, folks. 15, 16, our underrepresented minority populations were at 71% overall. And that's taken all the institutions, four-year institutions, right? Look at it, it's at 78% now. Our overall is at 80%. We've closed this within a 2.7 percentage points. And this is the best indicator we have of graduation of some sort. That's powerful. And look at the trajectory. I'm going to give you a lot of credit because it's you all doing the work. Yes, we push the policies, but y'all are doing the work. Next slide, please. So we are reaching out to do what we can do to ensure employability. We have this new program system of review that is not just looking to see how bad you're doing. It's saying, here's what you can do to improve in your current programs. This is what you can do to actually change your programs to focus on the future. But here's some programs you never thought about because we're looking 10 years down the road. What's going to be there? And that's why it's so good to work with employers to know this. So we're asking you to build programs for the future. So this is not about whether or not you have 1, 2, 3, or 4 graduates. That's beside the point. It's something bigger than that. This is whether or not our programs are powerful enough to serve our students for the future. And that's what we're doing here. We're infusing essential skills, we call it, into a variety of our programs. And pretty soon it's coming. We're going to be talking to you about our Gen Ed program where this becomes a part of the thread. And when I say the thread, when I think about higher education in K-12, the biggest pieces of our thread that builds the culture of the campus goes to professional development for our faculty and staff in the areas they need to be professionally developed in. And it's also building the curriculum to actually suit all of the students to get where they need to go. It is about deep learning, and you can assess that, by the way. I hear this conversation all the time about whether or not you can assess deep learning. You can't, but that's what we're doing. So it is about making sure that the students have the skills they need to get where they need to go. It is about having, though, a degree or a credential that fits that student. Now, we need to make sure that they're good. So we're going to do an evaluation of certain credentials to make sure they're serving where we need for them to serve and the students they need to serve. But we also know that we've got to build ourselves to a point to where people, when they get one of our students, they're going to say, I know I'm going to go to X, Y, and Z. I'm going to get that student because I know their quality. I want this to be said for every one of our academic institutions in this state. So we have to get employers in on the front end to help us design this to make sure we get it. Next slide, please. So what have we learned? Well, we can do hybrid learning well. We've learned that. But we also learned what the new foundational baseline is. We know we can get better. We've heard this from students and faculty. So we've got a new baseline now, right? And that's going to be the charge where I'm going to go here in a few minutes. Know that whatever baseline we had before has changed. And your job at the micro level is to figure out how much has changed and what you're going to do about it. The digital divide, well, it will continue. It will continue until we do the things we need to do, all of us together, to make sure that it doesn't. And I'm glad to see all kinds of different groups in Kentucky, the General Assembly, the governor's office, other groups wrap themselves around it at the national level, Pritchard here in the state, a variety of folks talking about this. CPE, all of us are saying that we've got to address this. And we know that higher education is essential to the recovery. If you look at after 2008 and 9, you can see exactly those data. And I wish we had more time today, I'd share those with you. Our mental health challenges will continue. We know that, but how we infuse ourselves in that process of immediately helping those that need it is exactly a charge that we have. Our vulnerable populations have become even more vulnerable. And so what are we going to do to ensure equity in those populations based even in a different philosophy than we had before COVID? But we've got to pay attention to these transition points. I call it pathways, process, pipelines, and potholes. For us to get where we need to go, and I tell people for us to have a strong higher education system in this state, we have to have a strong early childhood system. I appreciate we're going to an all-day kindergarten here coming pretty soon, but I also appreciate that we're focusing on all those transition points. We should not have the gaps we do all across that line. And so this is what the Ed Continuum is going to be working on, but we have to know what those gaps are. And we have to also have a goal that we're trying to get to. That's a part of your charge. Next slide, please. We have to innovate. I tell people, and people have heard me say this all the time, and they say, what does innovation mean? I'd say, well, we know it when we see it, but we know that we have a greater chance of doing it if we're proactive and we're intentional and we're strategic. So we have to be intentional about diversifying our revenue streams. How do we figure out how to help the student from any standpoint they can? That's why I'm pushing FAFSA, where we leave $40 million on the table every year of federal free money. We've got to figure out how that we need to do our business differently in higher ed. Are there back office things we can do together? How can we do better insourcing and outsourcing? Can we reduce our space to do the things we need to do? And we're probably going to be surely in a hybrid learning mode forever. And that doesn't mean we don't have face-to-face. We will. That means we're going to have purely online. We never will. But we will have a situation whereby we can think about, are we using the space in the same way that we need to? What about utilizing our space at 8 o'clock at night? What about making sure that our business functions are having it at 3 o'clock in the morning automated? What about going to competency-based programs where I'm working with the federal government to help us to do that? What about doing all kinds of things to make sure? What about having a course in the senior year of college when a student knows what he or she can do with that major, that capstone, right? How do we do things differently than we've ever thought about? That's innovation. Next slide, please. Instructional trends are what they are, but they are going to be even more of these. We're going to be looking at how to provide less expensive degrees and credentials. We're going to be looking at we're already flipping our classrooms many places, but that's going to become the norm. We're going to have augmented reality stuff, right? We're going to have more virtual inputs. Our books are looking differently. I'm an author. I can tell you, when I first started writing books decades ago, now I'm almost embarrassed to admit, to where they're at now and the kind of interactive elements to these books versus the way we used to be, this flat element to it. We're going to have to focus on what sets us apart. We have to focus on what I believe to be mission-related items among all of our institutions. They all need not to look alike. Even community colleges, they don't have to be alike, even if you're in a system. How do we do that? And how do we get people engaged in learning that they're very much part of it? How do we flip from a teaching paradigm to a learner's paradigm? How do we become guides on the side versus sages on the stage? Next slide, please. Student services. By the way, if you look at the research that goes to student success from an academic viewpoint only, faculty interaction with students in and out of the classroom, number one, but advisors interaction or mentors interaction with the students, number two. So how do we do that? How are we able to provide that in virtual ways more than ever, mental health in virtual ways more than ever. How do we do business hours and office hours differently? How do we work with our institutions to work with whomever? We've got to have a childcare option somewhere in this process, whether we provide it or we're with people to provide it. We've got to think about this because there's too many people that we are leaving out of this process because they can't get the assistance that they need with their children. Next slide, please. So looking ahead, we're going to be working even deeper with P12 than ever. I'm dedicated to that. Those who have known me for a long time know I've been talking this for a long time. So now we've got a formal infrastructure in place to make it happen. So you're going to see a lot coming out of us in this area. We're going to be, once again, doubling down on focusing on our vulnerable populations. And I want y'all to remember this slide here, because when we get to the end in a few minutes, that I'm going to be charging you to think about. We've got to figure out how we weather this current crisis and not get bogged down in it. We're going to come out of this. We're already coming out of this. What do we do about it? How do we become more nimble? And how do we think about innovation? How do we not let ourselves slip back into it? So the first charge you're going to hear me say is, don't slip back into the old things we used to do that didn't work. Don't do that. That's the power that we have. And how do we continue to change the value equation in higher education? How can we get more people to be involved and understand the power of it? How do we align ourselves in secondary education to focus heavily on that, to focus heavily on those skills that students need? How do we think about doing curriculum different than we've ever thought about? How do we focus on actually looking at where the students coming from, other than doing the stuff that we've done all along? Next slide, please. So in a few minutes, I want to ask that we open it to questions. Bruce, or it's whoever's doing this, I'm going to ask you to manipulate this, Stephanie. But I want to end this with my statement to you. And I'll come back after questions and give the final few seconds of remarks. But I want you to think about where you've been before COVID. This is your charge. I want you to think about where you've been before COVID. What was your baseline then? How did you see yourself doing your work at that time? Were you successful in doing your work at that time? Were you looking at everybody that came before you with an equity lens? Were you thinking that you may sound fair to everybody? Well, anytime you say that, you have to understand fairness is about taking it from where they're at, not from where you're at. So that's one thing. Number two is, what are you willing to do different based on the information that you have? What is your new baseline, in other words? What's your new foundation? What did this conference tell you? Don't spend 3 days in this and not walk out with 2 or 3 items that you know is powerful that you can implement. It's a waste of time unless you do that. Number 3 is, how can you proactively reach out and develop yourself even more? How can you get engaged in the process more? How can you build within your own local community a way to get other people engaged with you that may not even be in your profession? How do P12 and higher ed come together? How do we engage parents and families? How do we engage community members? How do we engage formerly peers to be a part of this process? How much are you willing to be a part of that system? And number 4, write down who you are, what you want to do to build yourself, not just to help others, but to build yourself to become that more complete person, whereby you know it's going to become a rote way of doing business, that it's the automatic way of thinking about equity. It's the automatic way of thinking about transitions. It's the automatic way of thinking that you have input into this and figuring out what that is. So I want to take some questions. Amanda or whomever is going to facilitate this, and I'll come back and end all of it in about a minute after questions are over.
Okay. President Thompson, thank you so much for a great way to end this conference and a lot of challenges. We do have a couple of questions So the first question is, and you've touched on this, but I don't know if you want to highlight specifically. It says, what do you feel are the top priority contingencies that Kentucky higher education should be fighting to put in place for the most success for current and future students?
Oh, wow, that's a that's a good question that I will try to answer in a few seconds. It's impossible for me to, because there's 4 or 5 things I think we have to do. One is realize that our student populations don't look like they did 10 years ago, much less 20 years ago. That's the first thing. So when we talk about first generation students this moment and what we're going to be talking about 10 years from now, it's going to be looking different than Aaron Thompson. Many of these will be first, this will not be their first language. Many of them, they will be first generation in this country. So how do we think about who our students are now? That's number one, and truly get it. Number two is we've got to look at the data and the analytics and what it tells us. We've got to do that. Not just say we're data driven, but what does it mean to truly look at things like gaps? What does it mean when we look at our own data and know that whatever we do at our micro level will have an impact on the macro, knowing that you have power here to do something about it. Number three is that we have to do this with the idea that you are important. You are. I mean, that's what we've been charged to do. Never believe that you're not important in this process, because this is where we fail miserably. We say, well, I can't do this by myself. The thing is too big. Lord have mercy. If I took that attitude, I don't know where I'd be. But know that you're important in the process. Number four, ask for help. You don't have to know everything. The 2 elements that you should know is to recognize what you don't know. And number 2 is to know how to get the stuff you need to get in order to know. Those are the things. So all of this is done with equity lens, right? But it's also knowing that we have to set up a new foundation to move forward and be willing to do that. Amanda, there's so many more answers to that question that we don't have time for, but those are the 4 things you must do in order to ensure that we are moving into the future with a stronger equity focus.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Thompson. I couldn't agree more. It was a great question. You have another question that has come up that said, you spoke on hybrid learning being here to stay. However, some universities are planning an all in-person classes for the fall 2021. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know of any universities doing all in. I don't know of any, not public universities, that's planning on that. I know of all of our public universities planning on being back face to face, but I don't think I have any of our institutions telling me that they're all going to be going back everything face to face. Hybrid learning is here to stay, folks. That's just the truth. Now, some institutions may do it more than others. Some institutions may do purely online more than others. And some institutions will be doing face-to-face more than others. But it's here. And I don't know of any of our institutions that are not planning for all of those. Every single one that I know of. So my argument is that it is here to stay. How do we get better at doing it? How do we even get better at face-to-face? To ever assume that we were perfect face-to-face is a bad assumption too, because we were not. I got a PhD, but no one ever taught me how to teach, right? So the idea that we are having to think about what does engagement means in a face-to-face, online, or a hybrid setting more than we've ever thought about. How do we reach everybody, knowing that some groups are going to be left out more for a variety of reasons, bad internet service maybe, but also that in fact they may not have had the background in it as much as other folks. So how do we figure out from a standpoint of where we have what I call the power, the authority, and the designation as that professional to do the work, how do we understand that and really increase the capacity? And not only that, even if they're not going back as fully as some people think that they may not be going back, that still doesn't stop the idea that we learn from what we learned from during this pandemic to make it better. Because it then becomes a pedagogical process. It becomes a way of us thinking about doing business, period. Because engagement just doesn't happen in that classroom face-to-face, even if that student is only doing a face-to-face class. That's the way we need to be thinking about this.
Thank you so much again, Dr. Thompson. That's the only questions we have. I think with the challenge and having them write things down, I think their minds are spinning. I have no doubt. And before I turn it back over to you for President Thompson to close us out, I do want to remind everyone that there is the evaluation for this online conference in your chat box. We really would appreciate your feedback. And as President Thompson said, this has been a collaborative effort, one we've never done before, and we just want to make it better and make it meaningful. I think this has been incredibly powerful and a great way to end today for sure. And so, Dr. Thompson, I'm going to hand it back to you to close us out, and we appreciate everything everyone has done.
Thank you, Amanda, once again. I'll just say that CPE here and Gear Up Kentucky here, which all falls under my purview, our main goal is to build community. Our main goal is saying that we can't do this alone. It's going to take a whole lot of people engaged with us at the most localized level possible, as well as at the macro level possible. So we are about building community. You're going to see a lot of things coming from both of those shops that will give you an opportunity to be a part of that community building. We also know that we are not just about talking about problems. My staff will tell you if they come to me with a problem, they know I'm going to shut them down fast if they're not bringing us a possible set of solutions we can discuss. So our community of practice will be about talking about solutions. So you will have an interactive way of being with a lot of your peers to talk about solutions. We so often can get into the middle of all these things and talk about the problems and not ever get to a solution. So this is about solution. Going forward, we're going to keep our collective focus on what we've done, our new baseline. And I think our new baseline is getting stronger. Even during COVID, resilience has become a whole new way of thinking about life. We can only get stronger from this, folks. And we can't get stronger without you. It's impossible. This nation, this state can't get stronger without you. Know your power. No, and it's not about abusing the power. It's knowing that that power has to be in such a way given that that altruism becomes the collective paradigm. And so we're going to get even better. I am so happy that you are a part of this conversation. I'm so happy you let me be still a part of this conversation. I'm happy with the results of what I've been able to see so far, and I hope you are too. Just know that we're always here to do what we can do to serve you, because that's the way we approach this. I don't approach this as a way of somehow sitting on a perch telling you what to do. I approach it as being able to lean back in my rocking chair and being that person that can truly be able to facilitate deep conversations about the solutions that we all can do together. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your Friday, and I look forward to seeing you.